Today I'm going to tell you a story that forever changed the way I see the word family. It began on what seemed like an ordinary evening, just one sentence, one smile, and suddenly, everything I had believed in for 35 years collapsed in a matter of seconds. Before we begin, have you ever had that moment when you realized you never truly belonged to the place you called family? And where are you watching from? Because I'm genuinely curious to see how far this story will travel. Thank you so much. I still remember that night at the Willow Table, the old-style American restaurant my family always chose for special occasions. The warm yellow light shimmered on polished silverware, and the smell of steak drifted gently through the air. I arrived 10 minutes early, as I always did, carrying a bottle of red wine I had carefully picked to celebrate the reunion I believed was happening the next day. It was late autumn in Portland, the air cool and crisp, and inside me was a small flicker of excitement, the hope of seeing everyone again, sitting together, talking like we used to. I truly believed that if I tried hard enough, every distance could be bridged. When my mother walked in, I stood and smiled to greet her. She was the same as always, petite, wearing a beige cardigan, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as if she were grading the room. My father followed, stern but distant. Then came Vanessa, her heels clicking with confidence, phone in hand, mumbling something to her followers on a live stream. They sat down. Everything seemed so normal that for a brief moment, I thought all our past misunderstandings had faded away. I poured the wine and said softly, "I've really been looking forward to the reunion tomorrow." I took a day off to prepare some food and even bought a few gifts for the kids. I had no idea I had just set the stage for one of the most painful moments of my life. My mother looked up, her lips curling slightly, her expression a mix of pity and disdain. "That reunion," she said calmly, "already happened last week." I froze. The words "last week" echoed in my head, then shattered like glass. Vanessa shrugged, her eyes still glued to her phone, a half-smile curling on her lips. "You're not real family, so why would you be invited?" The words were light, almost casual, yet they cut straight through like a blade. The whole table burst into laughter. My father nodded slightly, smiling as he sliced his steak, as if it were some harmless joke not worth taking seriously. My mother gave a faint, dismissive smile, the kind that said, "Don't make a scene." Vanessa turned her camera toward me and whispered, "My followers are going to love your reaction." I looked around the table and suddenly felt like an extra in a family portrait that had been framed long ago, just a blurred background. No one ever bothered to adjust the lighting. 4. I didn't cry. I didn't say a word. I simply set my glass down, the bitter taste of wine lingering on my tongue, though the real bitterness had already risen to my chest. I stood up, folded my napkin neatly, a reflex of habit more than anything, and said quietly, almost to myself, "I understand." No one stopped me. Not a single glance of remorse, not one voice calling me back. I walked out of the restaurant, the cold Portland air brushing against my face, seeping into my skin. My heels clicked softly on the damp brick pavement as I made my way to the parking lot, and inside me was a strange kind of silence, not sadness, but awakening. I sat in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes weren't wet like they used to be after moments of humiliation. Instead, they were calm, steady, and clear. For the first time, I realized I was looking at myself without their lens distorting who I was. I drove home through the rain, the streetlights shimmering across the windshield, and in that quiet, flickering light, old memories came flooding back like a slow-motion reel I had tried so hard to forget. I remembered being 25, just starting my first job at an interior design firm. My paycheck barely covered rent and student loans, but one night my father called, saying his car's transmission had failed and he needed a few thousand to fix it. His tone was the same as always, part responsibility, part pressure, reminding me that I was the sensible one in the family. That night, I transferred $2,800 to his account and received only a short text in return. "Thanks, good girl." A week later, I saw Vanessa post a picture with that same car, captioned "Family Ride Day" with a heart emoji. I didn't ask questions. I just worked harder, took on extra projects, and kept telling myself I was doing it out of love, not for recognition. When my parents' house in Beaverton received a foreclosure notice from the bank, I was the one who sent them money to save it. 3 years later, I was still the one signing as co-guarantor when they refinanced the new loan. No one ever asked how I managed it. They simply saw it as the duty of the eldest child. In every family conversation, they spoke about Vanessa with pride. She's so talented, so influential, so loved by everyone. And me? I was just her sister, the reliable one with a steady job. Steady, that word became a label that trapped me for more than a decade. In 2020, the pandemic turned everything upside down. My mother was rushed to the hospital for a heart condition. I remember that night vividly, driving through the darkness from Portland to Salem just to sign insurance papers and pay an advance of $18,000 in hospital fees. My father didn't have enough money, and Vanessa was filming a charity vlog in California. I handled everything: the ICU arrangements, the doctors, the medications, even sending money to my father for his stay near the hospital. During those weeks, I slept in waiting rooms, drank instant coffee, and worked remotely with my laptop balanced on my knees. When my mother recovered, she held my hand with tears in her eyes and said, "You're my blessing." But 2 days later, when she posted a thank you note on Facebook, the caption read, "Thank you, God, for hearing the prayers of my youngest daughter, Vanessa. Because of her, I was saved." I read that line over and over again, my heart tightening each time. It wasn't that I needed praise, it was the realization that, in their story, I had never existed. From that moment on, I learned silence. I kept sending them money every month, just in case, still helped my father with bills, still edited Vanessa's sponsorship contracts, still redesigned her apartment layout for her lifestyle videos. But deep down, I knew I was only maintaining the illusion of a family that had never truly been whole. I used to believe that if I just stayed kind, they would eventually see it. But kindness, in a toxic family, isn't a language of healing, it's a language that teaches others how to keep taking without ever giving back. I remember one time, when Vanessa launched her cosmetics brand, she asked me to redesign the garden space in just 2 days. I did it for free, paid for the materials myself, and even hired 2 friends to work overtime. On the day of the party, my mother said in front of everyone, "Vanessa designed it all herself, she has such great taste." I stood behind her, paint still on my hands, smiling as if it didn't matter. Eventually, I even began to believe that being forgotten was simply natural. Those years, I was like a quiet worker in the background of their story, the one who cleaned, fixed, and saved things, but was never the main character. Caring for them became a reflex. When the phone rang, my heart would race because I already knew it would be, "Rachel, Mom needs your help with this," or "Rachel, Dad needs money urgently." I had grown used to never being asked, "Are you okay?" And as I got older, I understood that one-sided love isn't really love at all, it's depletion. I once broke down crying while drafting plans at midnight, remembering how my mother had told a neighbor that I never cared about anyone. She said it right in front of me and still managed to smile as if it were a funny anecdote. I smiled along so she wouldn't lose face. My greatest skill was making everything look fine even when I was breaking inside. After that night at the Willow table, when I heard them say I wasn't real family, I finally understood that all those years I had been paying for something they never valued. I had been the one holding them together with money, time, and silence. But in return, they saw me only as a source, not as someone who belonged. My trust hadn't shattered in a single day, it had rotted slowly, piece by piece, through every moment I was forgotten, every time my work was stolen, every time I was cut out of the picture. And when the wine glass on that restaurant table shattered inside me, I knew those fragments could never be pieced back together again. That night, when I got home, I opened my design notebook, but instead of sketching, I wrote a single sentence. "They don't need me, they only need what I bring." Then I closed the notebook. I thought to myself, maybe it was time to stop fixing a house that had already rotted from within. Because sometimes the only way to keep it from collapsing is to walk out before it does. 3 days after that evening at the Willow table, Portland was still draped in a soft, endless rain. I was sitting at my desk, trying to finish the design for a Riverside senior home. The blueprint lay unfinished, lines still in mid-draft, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Overdraw attempt, declined. My brows furrowed. A transaction for just over $3,000, exactly $3,200, had been denied because the person attempting to withdraw had no access rights. Account name, Lawson Family Emergency Fund. I had created that account 3 years ago after my mother's heart attack, thinking it would be a safety net so that, if something happened, no one would have to worry. I was the only one who ever deposited money $1,000 a month, every month, without fail. At first, I believed it would give the whole family peace of mind. But over time, it had turned into their private bank. They used it for everything: car repairs, credit card bills, even Vanessa's deposit for a photo studio to shoot her cosmetics line. No one had ever asked, "Are you okay?" or "Do you want to share the load?" The unspoken rule was simple: if they needed, I would pay. Now, looking at that declined notification, my heart no longer hurt. It felt empty, cold, and strangely silent. I opened the banking app and stared at the balance over $42,000 still sitting there. A number I had once thought of as a safety rope for the family now stood as a monument to my own naivety. My fingers moved slowly, almost trembling, as I pressed transfer. I moved the entire amount into my private account, the one no one knew about. Then I locked the linked card, changed all the passwords, and enabled biometric authentication. Each tap felt like cutting another old rope wrapped around my wrists. Right after that, I took a screenshot of the transaction declined notice and sent it to my father with a single line: "Payment denied." Must be that family-only policy. Just 7 words, but like a soft punch, precise and strong enough to make the reader understand I wasn't the one who would endure anymore. 10 minutes later, my father called. I let the phone ring until it stopped. He called again, and then a third time. I stayed silent. I didn't want to hear that familiar voice, the one laced with authority and the unspoken assumption that I would obey. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat still, listening to the rain beating steadily against the window. I knew he wouldn't stop. But this time, I wasn't afraid. In my head, memories of the emergency fund replayed like an old tape. The night my mother called, crying because the electric bill isn't paid, they might cut it off. The morning my father texted, "Send me something," the car broke down on the road. Even Vanessa, calling me for the first time just to ask, "Do you still have a limit on your card?" "I just need to borrow $2,000. I'll pay you back after my next job." No one ever paid back. No one ever mentioned it again. And I had never asked. I stood up and made coffee. As the hot water poured in and the steam rose in a soft haze, I suddenly realized this was the first time I was doing something purely for myself, not for anyone else, not to save anyone, but to reclaim a part of my life they had spent. Yet, at the same time, another feeling crept in: fear. I was afraid because from that moment on, I had officially cut the only remaining thread tying me to them. I was afraid of the silence that would follow, afraid they would call or show up at my door tomorrow, afraid of the accusations, afraid of my own weakness. Because I knew no one could make me feel guilty quite like they could. They didn't need to yell. Just one sentence like, "How can you abandon your family?" was enough to shake me, but I couldn't go back. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account again, just to see the zero under family fund. Everything looked wiped clean, empty, weightless. I took a deep breath, sipped my coffee, and let myself feel that emptiness. Freedom always comes with loneliness, and this time was no different. Around 10 o'clock, Vanessa sent a message. "Dad says the account's not working. Can you check it?" I watched the screen light up but didn't reply. Another message arrived a minute later. "Must be a bank error. Mom's worried." I let out a small laugh. "No, are you okay? No, are you upset? Only, where's our money?" I set the phone down and stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped. The post-rain air was damp and cool, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves. In the distance, the Hawthorne Bridge glimmered, cars lined up one after another. Everything out there kept moving as if no one had just ended a 35-year relationship with their family by pressing a single transfer button. Inside me, emotions tangled strangely, lightness mixed with trembling. What does freedom taste like? Perhaps it tastes like cold air, like silence, like fear braided with relief. But I knew this was only the beginning. I had cut the cord, and the people on the other end of it would not stay still. The next evening, just as I turned off the living room lights and was about to make myself a cup of ginger tea, a knock echoed at the door. At first, it was 3 short taps, then quickly turned into loud, heavy pounding, as if someone were trying to break it down. I glanced at the clock, 8:46 p.m., my heart skipped half a beat. I knew exactly who was outside. Each thud against the door reverberated through the walls, straight into my chest. I walked to the door, but didn't open it right away. I looked through the peephole. Just as I expected, my father, my mother, and Vanessa. My father stood in front, face flushed red, eyes burning with anger sharp enough to pierce through the wood. My mother stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, wearing that familiar look of wounded innocence I had seen 1,000 times before. And Vanessa, as always, held her phone up, camera pointed toward me, her hair in a tight bun, lips slightly curled, recording, no doubt, for one of her reaction videos. I didn't open immediately. I let them stand there for a moment, listening to the sound of rain pattering on the porch roof and my father's voice growling through the door. "Rachel, open this door. Did you really cut off your family's money?" Each word landed like a hammer blow against old memories every time he had shouted like that, when I hadn't transferred money fast enough, when I dared to question who actually paid the bills. I took a deep breath, turned the lock, and opened the door just a small crack. The cold air rushed in, carrying my mother's perfume mixed with the faint smell of tobacco from my father's coat. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. My father glared, pointing a finger at me. "Don't play dumb. That account was family money. Who do you think you are, locking us out like that?" I looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. "That account is under my name. I created it to help, not to be taken advantage of." "No," my mother cut in, her voice trembling but sharp. "Watch your tone. That fund was for the family. Your father and I used it for everyone. What's wrong with that?" I let out a short, dry laugh. "What's wrong is that you said everyone, but the only person who ever put money into it was me." Vanessa kept recording, the light from her phone casting a pale glow over her face. "Are you turning this into a documentary or something? This is such a Netflix-level family tragedy," she sneered. I looked at her and asked quietly, "Are you seriously recording this?" She shrugged. "My followers love family drama. Don't act like this is new to you." My father snapped his head toward her and barked, "Turn that phone off." Then he turned back to me, lowering his voice but filling it with warning. "You're embarrassing this family, Rachel. No matter how angry you are, this family is still yours." I tilted my head slightly, my tone steady and deliberate. "Is it? Because the other night at the Willow table, Mom said I wasn't real family, so what am I now?" No one answered. My mother opened her mouth, then shut it again. Vanessa stopped filming and looked away. The air around us seemed to freeze, broken only by the sound of heavy rain hitting the porch steps. I knew I had struck exactly where it hurt most. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. "You're becoming cruel," my mother whispered, her voice trembling as if I'd committed a sin. "We just want things to go back to the way they were." "The way they were?" I smiled faintly. "You mean when I paid every bill while you pretended Vanessa was the one who saved your life? Or when Dad said he loved the family but secretly drained the fund without telling anyone?" My father's fists clenched tight. I could see the veins rise on his neck. "You're ungrateful," he hissed through his teeth. "Everything your mother and I did was for the family, for you. Without us, do you think you'd even have your education, your job?" I exhaled softly, almost like a laugh. "You're right, Dad. Without you, I probably would have learned to love myself a lot sooner, so thank you for that lesson." I gently pushed the door toward them just enough to make it clear that the conversation was over. "Go home. Don't come here again unless it's to talk about something other than what you think you're entitled to." "Rachel!" my mother shouted, her voice breaking. I paused, my tone calm but firm. "Mom, silence isn't peace anymore, it's complicity, and I'm done being complicit in being treated like an ATM." I closed the door. A loud thud followed. My father slammed his fist against it, the sound echoing down the hallway. I stayed still, my hand gripping the handle tightly, but I didn't open it. Outside, he yelled a few more incoherent words before his voice faded away. Their footsteps eventually disappeared into the sound of rain. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The Portland sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, soft, pale, and cold. I sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee by my side, laptop open to my banking page. I hadn't slept all night since the confrontation. Something in me wouldn't settle, not just anger, but an instinct that this wasn't over. My father wasn't the kind of man to back down quietly, and my mother, skilled at feigning helplessness, wouldn't sit still after losing control. I decided to check everything. I opened every account, every credit card. I reviewed each transaction, each statement, each unfamiliar line, and noted them carefully. At first, I thought it might just be duplicate charges or system errors. But as I looked closer, I found invisible expenses that had been appearing for over a year: online shopping, add-on phone plans, even a secondary credit card issued under my name that I had never applied for. I opened the detailed report, my heartbeat quickening when I saw a transaction from a furniture store in Florida, Suncrest Decor Designs, for $8,400, labeled for interior consultation. I had never set foot in Florida, and I had never taken on any project there. A chill ran down my spine. I checked the credit card records again and saw the tiny words, "Authorized user, Margaret Lawson." My mother. In my entire life, I had never imagined she would cross a line like this. She had always presented herself as timid, financially anxious, the one who said, "I'm only borrowing, I'll pay it back," whenever I helped her. But now it was clear temporary had turned into forever. And I opened another bank profile and saw a string of automatic payments for phone bills, internet services, and clothing stores, all tied to their address in Beaverton. Small amounts: $60, $120, $200 a month, but added up, they formed a long trail of spending that stretched back 3 years. I drew in a long breath and pulled my chair closer. The rational part of me, the part sharpened by years of design work, where everything had to be precise and documented, switched on. I opened a new Excel file and typed the title: Unauthorized Transactions. First column, date. Second column, vendor. Third column, amount. Last column, notes. For nearly 2 hours, I worked in silence, not eating, not speaking. When I finished, the sheet was almost 20 lines long. The total exceeded $20,000. I leaned back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly. In my mind, the scattered pieces of memory slid into place to form a complete picture. The times my mother said, "My card isn't working, can I borrow yours?" The strange phone bills I had assumed were mistakes, Vanessa flaunting new decor without explaining where the money came from. It all matched. They had used my name, my identity, to withdraw, to spend, to build a false version of their lives. I didn't know what to feel first: shock, grief, or shame. But what scared me the most was that I didn't feel much of anything at all. Just a blank, cold white space where emotions used to be. I decided to call Ethan, an old friend from my college days who now worked as a legal specialist at a financial advisory firm. When I gave him a brief rundown of what I discovered, he went silent for a moment before saying, "Send me every copy of the transactions you have. I'll find out who opened the additional card and trace the credit activity linked to it." I emailed everything to him, attaching the spreadsheet and screenshots. An hour later, he called back, his voice tinged with surprise and a hint of pity. Rachel, you're not mistaken. The secondary card was opened legally because the authorizing party was Margaret Lawson, your mother. But here's the thing, you never signed the consent form. Someone forged your signature. Hack. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. Ethan continued, I can dig into the full credit history. And if you want, we can file an identity theft claim. But you need to be prepared, this isn't just about money. This is a criminal offense. I understand, I said softly. Do whatever needs to be done. That afternoon, he sent me the full report. Among the transactions were transfers into Vanessa's account labeled personal allowance. Some invoices even matched items featured in her videos: the vanity set, the blue velvet chair, the round Hollywood-style lights she'd once boasted about buying with her own hard-earned money. I printed everything out and arranged it neatly into a red folder. Each page felt like a small blade, slicing through the last illusion that any honesty remained between us. I sat staring at the folder on my desk. No anger. No tears. Only absolute coldness. I had always believed that if betrayal ever came, I would collapse. But when it actually happened, my mind felt sharp, clear as crystal. I no longer saw myself as a victim but as someone who had finally opened her eyes to a house that had been smoldering for years. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my dignity, my trust, and even my name to build the image they wanted to protect. Before going to bed, I opened my phone and scrolled through my mother's Facebook page. The newest photo showed her standing beside Vanessa in front of their house, the caption reading, "Family where all love begins and never ends." I stared at that photo for a long time, then put the phone down and whispered to myself, maybe she's right, but sometimes love has to end so someone can finally begin again. I turned off the lights but didn't fall asleep right away. Outside, the cold wind moved through the trees, carrying a low murmur like a reminder. The truth had surfaced, and there was no way back. The next day, as I sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop screen reflected off the red folder the stack of evidence I had printed the night before. The apartment was silent except for the steady sound of rain falling outside the window. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to hand everything over to the police. Another part wanted to close the laptop and disappear from this city, leave it all behind. Just then, my phone vibrated. On the screen appeared a name I hadn't expected: Walter Green. My grandfather. The man my family had cut off nearly 10 years ago. I froze for a second, then pressed answer. Rachel. His voice was deep, slow, tremoring slightly with age but clearer than ever. I know everything. They've treated you terribly. Oh. I couldn't respond right away. I just exhaled softly. Grandpa, how do you know? He chuckled lightly on the other end, the sound rough but warm. Did you forget? I still have a few friends at the bank. Everything finds its way back to me. But don't worry, you're not crazy, you're just waking up. I bit my lip, tears rising for reasons I couldn't fully explain. Just a few words, but they tore open the cold silence I'd endured for years. I tried to keep my voice steady. They used my name to take loans, open cards, spend money. I don't recognize them anymore. On the other end, he sighed a sound that seemed to stretch across time. Rachel, this didn't start recently. I'm afraid you don't know that I've been a victim of theirs too. I frowned. What are you saying? I set up a fund called the Green Family Trust Fund when your parents got married, he said slowly. The purpose was to help them if they ever ran into trouble, so they wouldn't have to borrow from loan sharks. I gave them limited access, $20,000 a year. But recently, when I reviewed the records, I discovered withdrawals that were more than double that limit. When I asked the accountant, he said your parents had submitted an additional temporary authorization. I went cold. Temporary authorization? But you never signed anything. One? Exactly, he replied, his voice tightening. I never signed a thing. The signature on file is forged, and the person who signed in my place was your father. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. The pieces began to lock into place. They hadn't just used my name to take money, they'd forged my grandfather's signature, the only person in the family who had ever helped them without conditions. "Grandpa, do you have proof?" "Yes," he said firmly. "You should come see me tomorrow. I want you to look at all the documents yourself. I've also had my own lawyer review everything. If the forgery is real, this is a criminal act, and I'm not staying silent anymore." I sat there, stunned. All these years I'd thought of him as a rigid old man, the one who had once shouted at my mother for trying to sell a piece of inherited land without asking him first. After that, my mother cut off contact, telling everyone he was controlling and stingy. I had believed her, avoiding him because I thought he didn't want to see me. But now, his voice came through the phone warm and clear, like the only person truly on my side. The next morning, I drove south through the city. My grandfather's house sat on a rise in Forest Park, an old dark brown wooden cabin with moss creeping around the porch. I hadn't been there in over 8 years. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell of pine and strong coffee spread through the air, filling me with an odd sense of calm. He was sitting in the living room, a wooden table in front of him covered with files, envelopes, sealed documents, and stacks of bank statements. He looked at me, his eyes gentle but resolute. "Sit down, Rachel. I think you need to see this." Saturday. He slid a thick folder toward me. Inside was a photocopy titled Amendment to Trust Fund Agreement. At the bottom, I immediately recognized the clumsy handwriting trying to mimic his slanted script. The signature read Walter Green. My eyes widened. Underneath, on the cosigner line, was my mother's name, Margaret Lawson. I read the first sentence aloud. "I, Walter Green, agree to allow Margaret Lawson and her husband, Robert Lawson, to withdraw an additional $50,000 from the family trust fund for emergency reasons. Date signed, 2 years ago." I turned to him, speechless. He nodded slowly. "I never signed it, and there was no emergency. They forged my signature, faxed it to the bank, and withdrew the money themselves. I only discovered it when my accountant sent me this year's audit report." He paused, looking at me with a kind of sorrow. "Rachel, I let them do this for too long. I thought silence would keep the peace. But I was wrong. My silence made me complicit." I stared down at the papers, the numbers blurring in front of me. "They've taken your money, and mine. This isn't just greed, it's reckless." "Exactly," he said. "And now it has to stop." He opened a smaller envelope and took out a handwritten note. "These are the withdrawal slips. Look closely." I studied them, multiple transfers into an account under the name Vanessa Lawson. Several matched the charges I had seen on my own credit report. The same pattern, the same machinery. They had turned 2 generations into their victims. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the window where the autumn light streamed through tiny floating dust particles. Inside me there was no longer anger, only exhaustion. But within that exhaustion, something else began to emerge: clarity. For the first time, I could see the road ahead clearly. Not revenge out of hatred, but action out of justice. Walter stood up, walked to the table, and poured me a cup of hot tea. He placed a trembling hand on my shoulder, his voice low but steady. "You can choose silence, the way I once did, or you can choose to end this chain of deceit. Whatever you decide, I'll stand by you. Because, Rachel, you are the only one in this family who has kept her integrity." I looked up, my eyes stinging but bright. "Grandpa," I said slowly, "if they can forge your signature and use my name, then neither of us has anything left to lose, so let's see this through." He nodded, his frail hand tightening slightly around mine. "Good," he whispered. "This time, we won't let them rewrite the story." That afternoon, as I left his house, the first rain of the season began to fall again. But this time, I didn't feel cold. I felt like I was walking through a different kind of rain, one of awakening, of resolve. I knew the real storm was just beginning. But at least now, I wasn't alone. 3 days after meeting with Walter, Portland was once again drenched in rain, cold and unrelenting, as if the city itself was trying to wash away something heavy. I had just finished a call with Ethan, my lawyer friend, confirming that the fraud report concerning the trust fund was officially being filed. Everything was in motion slowly, but steadily. I knew turbulence was coming. What I didn't expect was that the first wave would come from someone I thought had already chosen the other side. That afternoon, I heard a soft knock on the door. Not the pounding kind my father used, just 3 hesitant taps. I opened it and saw Vanessa. She had no phone, no heavy makeup, none of that forced influencer smile. She looked smaller, paler, her eyes swollen red as if she'd been crying all night. In her hand was a damp coat, rain still clinging to it. I simply said, "Come in." The apartment was so quiet that we could hear the drip of rainwater from the gutter outside. Vanessa sat on the sofa, avoiding my gaze. Nearly a full minute passed before she spoke, her voice hoarse. "Do you know what Mom told me?" I stayed silent, shaking my head slightly. "She said you were mentally unstable, that you were trying to tear the family apart, that you wanted to sue everyone for money. She told me to post stories supporting her, saying you'd misunderstood everything. I did it because I was scared." I looked at her, not surprised. "Scared of what?" Vanessa gave a weak, trembling laugh as tears slipped down her face. She wiped them quickly, as if ashamed to be seen crying. "Scared Mom would cut me off from the joint account. Scared she'd tell the brands I work with that I'm unreliable. Scared she'd expose the fact that I'm in debt." I frowned. "In debt?" She nodded, lowering her head. "I owe over $20,000. I signed a few skincare promo contracts without reading the fine print. I had to buy the products myself, pay for ads to hit the engagement targets, and then got hit with penalty fees. I ran out of money. Mom told me to ask you for help, but I couldn't. Every time I mentioned your name, she'd say you were selfish, that you only thought about yourself." Her voice broke. "But now I know that's not true." I sighed and sat down beside her. "Mom made you believe everything was my fault, just like she once made me believe everything was my responsibility." Vanessa lifted her head, her eyes glistening. "You know, when Mom was in the hospital in 2020, she made me take a picture of myself praying so she could post it on Facebook. She said, 'People need to see you care about your mother.' When that post went viral, everyone praised me for being a devoted daughter, but you were the one sitting in the hospital all night. I knew that. But Mom told me not to say anything. She said, 'The family has to look consistent.'" I gave a faint, bitter smile. I figured as much. Mom always did love perfection as long as the picture looked complete. She didn't care if it was hollow inside. Vanessa buried her face in her hands. "I'm so tired, Rachel, tired of pretending, tired of playing the role of the successful daughter. I don't even know who I am anymore." Her voice cracked into sobs. "I know you're angry. I deserve it, but I don't know what to do. I can't live in that house anymore. Mom controls everything: my phone, my money, my work, every contract I sign, she has to approve. I don't have any freedom left. She said if I don't do what she says, she'll tell Dad about my debts. And you know how Dad is, he'll lose it." I stayed silent for a long time. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew any word from me could make her crumble completely. I stood, opened the desk drawer, and took out my checkbook. As I began to write, Vanessa looked up, her face frozen in disbelief. I signed my name, tore the check out, and placed it in front of her. $6,000, I said quietly. "Not much, but enough for you to leave. Find a place to stay, start over." Her eyes widened. You're really helping me? After everything I said? After everything I did?" I looked straight at her, my voice calm but firm. "Don't use it to pay their debts. Use it to get away. You don't owe me anything. But if you really want to save yourself, the first step is to walk out of that cycle." Vanessa gripped the check tightly, her hands trembling. "Why would you still help me? I don't deserve it." I gave a faint smile. "Because I don't want to hate you, I just want it to stop." The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the clock and Vanessa's shaky breathing filled the air. After a while, She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks, but this time, they seemed lighter, freer. "You know," she whispered, "I've never seen you this strong before. I used to think you were weak, that you let everyone walk all over you. But now I get it, your silence was never weakness. It's what scared me most, because it made the truth impossible to ignore." I looked at my sister for the first time, not as an adversary, but as a lost young woman trying to find her way out. I poured her another cup of hot tea and set it gently in front of her. "You can start over, Vanessa. No one's stopping you from doing the right thing, but this time, do it for yourself, not for anyone else." She nodded, clutching the check in her hand as if it were a lifeline. "I'll go. A friend in Denver said there's an empty room I can stay in for a few months. I'll find a new job. I don't want to go back to that house anymore." I placed my hand on her shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Good, keep that promise." Before leaving, Vanessa paused by the door. "If Mom finds out about this, she'll lose it," she said quietly. "She'll say you poisoned me." I shrugged. "Let her say it. People only fear losing what's real. What she's afraid of losing was never real to begin with." The door closed softly behind her, leaving the faint scent of rain lingering in the air. I stood still, staring at the cup of tea she'd left on the table, the steam still rising. For the first time in years, I saw a small crack in the walls of that family, a crack just wide enough for light to come through. And I knew that once someone begins to see the truth, the entire structure of lies will eventually collapse. The messages started flooding in the next morning. The first was a voice note from a distant aunt in Salem. "Honey, your mother says you're planning to sue the whole family. Is that true? Oh dear, family matters should stay behind closed doors." Then an old neighbor from Beaverton sent me a Facebook link, a long post written by my mother, dressed up in moral language. "When money blinds the heart, even the child you raised can turn against the home that nurtured her." I replied. Underneath, the comments were painfully familiar. "Poor Margaret, having such an ungrateful eldest daughter. Kids these days only care about money. Vanessa is the real pride of that family." I didn't like, comment, or explain. I turned off notifications, took a few screenshots, then set my phone face down. I had learned not to waste oxygen keeping someone else's story alive. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled the red folder closer, and began doing what I knew I did best, organizing the truth. Ethan called on video. He was wearing headphones, sitting against a white wall covered in sticky notes. "Let's begin," he said, opening a shared folder on the screen titled Case, Lawson v. Esch. Unauthorized use, internal. Inside were the drafts of the civil complaint, a detailed list of unauthorized transactions, photo attachments of forged credit agreements, trust fund statements, and a handwriting analysis report. "Rachel, step 1. He said, file the identity theft report with the FTC to get your case number. Step 2. Freeze your credit with Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Step 3. Send a demand and preservation letter to compel them to retain all related documents. Step 4. File a civil complaint for unauthorized use of identity and breach of trust fund, with a court subpoena for the bank's records." I nodded, opened a new tab, and began completing the form on identitytheft.gov using the details he'd prepared. With every click of next, it felt like I was sliding another deadbolt shut. That afternoon, Ethan and I went to the notary's office so Walter could sign his affidavit as a witness. In it, he detailed the creation of the Green Family Trust, the annual withdrawal limit, the date he discovered the forged amendment, and affirmed that he had never signed or authorized any faxed approval. His hand trembled slightly, but his writing remained steady and graceful. When the red seal pressed down, I heard a sharp, satisfying thud like an anchor finally dropping after a long storm. "One lock secured," Ethan said. "Now for the demand letter." The letter was meticulously drafted, 7 pages long. It began with a summary of the events, cited the specific breaches of the trust agreement, listed the unauthorized card transactions, and demanded that all parties immediately cease using my identity, return the misappropriated funds, and preserve every related record, device, email, and message. The final line was short but razor-sharp. Any destruction of data after receipt of this notice will constitute bad faith, spoliation, and will be subject to adverse action by the court. Ethan told me to sign it digitally. He would send both certified mail and email copies. I signed without a tremor. Outside, the rumors were swelling like a balloon inflated with panic. My mother's pastor texted me, saying she was praying for Rachel to come back to the family, along with a Bible verse about honoring one's parents. A neighbor from my building posted a video of my father arguing with security for trying to get upstairs, captioned on the neighborhood app. Lawson family drama. Then came a call from an unknown number, a man's voice, faintly accented. Are you really trying to disgrace your parents in public? I didn't hang up. I said, I'm protecting my own identity. Goodbye. Then I blocked the number. No explanations, no defenses. The truth would stand on its own when the time came, and I needed to save my energy for the things that had structure, process, and accountability. On the third day, an email appeared from a law firm where I'd interned 7 years ago. The subject line read, Pro Bono Inquiry, Family Trust Abuse. They wrote that they'd heard about the case through Ethan's professional network, noting it as a textbook example of intrafamily trust fund abuse and identity theft. They offered to assist pro bono with research and court filings, calling it a model case for their internal training program. I read the email twice before replying, I agree, but I don't want this turned into a media weapon. I only want boundaries. Their response came quickly. We respect that. No. Ethan suggested one more step, filing a brief non-emergency identity theft report with the local police department to create an official record in case criminal action was needed later. I went to the station, sat on a blue plastic chair, and answered each question carefully, submitting copies of Walter's affidavit, the transaction logs, and the signature photos. The officer took notes diligently, then handed me a case number and his business card. If they approach you at home or work in a threatening way, he said, call 911. It could escalate to harassment. I nodded, slipped the card into my wallet, and walked outside. The air was cold, but the sky was clearer than it had been in weeks. That night, my mother called. I answered, knowing I'd need to record the conversation. Her voice trembled, half pleading, half manipulative. Don't do this, Rachel. The neighbors are laughing at me. Are you really suing your own family? Who's been putting these ideas in your head? I spoke calmly. I'm filing a claim because my identity was used without my consent. As for the trust fund, Grandpa signed an affidavit as witness. This isn't a joke, Mom. Her tone shifted instantly, breaking into sobs. I just wanted to keep the family together. I closed my eyes, speaking slowly. By forging Grandpa's signature? By opening credit cards in my name? What exactly are you trying to keep together, the family or the image of one? There was silence on the other end, long, sharp, and final. Then she hung up. The next morning, my parents' attorney sent a short email denying all allegations, claiming that all withdrawals were made for the benefit of the family and with the implied consent of all parties. Ethan let out a dry laugh. That line gives them away. Implied consent is the most desperate phrase in the vocabulary of desperation. He immediately drafted a contingency motion requesting a temporary restraining order in case my father tried to confront or threaten me at home or work. Again. I reread every line, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim tossed around in a storm. I felt like the one in the cockpit, eyes fixed on the control panel. The story spread through our small community like wildfire. But across the hill, in Walter's wooden house, everything moved at a different pace. He carefully gathered old files, called the trust's accountant, sent written orders suspending all withdrawal rights of my parents, and reassigned the trustee oversight. He told me quietly, I've stayed silent for too long. I thought letting things go was love, but love without boundaries turns into the breeding ground for abuse. I looked at his frail hand resting on the folder's edge, steady, unshaken, quietly resolute. By the weekend night, I received an email from the Risk and Compliance Division of the bank managing the trust. They confirmed that an internal review had been opened in response to the evidence preservation demand. Attached was a list of items they were backing up: fax documents, login logs, recorded calls with the individual identifying as Walter Green, and the ID copies submitted during the withdrawal limit change. I read the last line twice. "We have flagged the incident due to a voice print mismatch with the biometric profile on record." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Technology, I thought, might just be the coldest form of justice. It doesn't flatter memory, and it doesn't care about emotion. I knew from here on, there would be tense conversations strung tight like wire pleas disguised as threats, distant relatives suddenly acting as moral judges. That morning, Portland was cold. The sun had just begun to rise over the trees, its dim light spreading across the neighborhood like a thin veil. I made myself a cup of coffee, fixed my hair in the mirror, and got ready for work. After months of chaos, I finally felt life settling into some rhythm again. The civil case was being handled by Ethan and the pro bono legal team. Walter still called every night to ask, "Did you eat? Did you lock the door?" I thought things were finally quieting down. Until I heard the sound of a familiar engine outside my window. I pulled back the curtain. My parents' black SUV was parked right in front of the building entrance. The door swung open, and my father stepped out, still wearing the same old suit he always used when he wanted to project authority. My mother followed, clutching a folder-filled handbag, her face pale. Behind them stood a young man with slicked-back hair and a leather briefcase, clearly the private lawyer they'd hired to defend the family's honor. My heart pounded, but my mind stayed cold. I didn't open the door. I watched as they walked toward the building, the sunlight filtering through the trees, making the scene look like a play that had been rehearsed one too many times. Then, just as they reached the steps, another car pulled up Walter's. The door opened, and he stepped out slowly, wearing a gray cardigan, calm but sharp as glass. Ethan followed behind him, documents in hand, his stride steady and deliberate. The look in Walter's eyes as he faced my father was no longer that of a father who once forgave too much. It was the look of a man who had finally reached his limit. The air felt thick enough to cut. I opened the door and stood in the doorway just enough for everyone to see me, but not enough for anyone to step inside. My father's voice came low and sharp. "Rachel, we need to talk. There's not going to be any lawsuit, do you understand? You're being manipulated." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Manipulated? The girl doesn't need anyone to manipulate her, Robert. She's protecting herself, something you both forgot to teach her a long time ago." My mother blinked rapidly, her expression caught somewhere between fear and indignation. "You don't understand. We just want to keep this family together. Everything's been blown out of proportion. Rachel didn't mean for it to go this far." Ethan's tone was cool, precise. "I think the forged signatures on the trust fund documents make it very clear whose intentions we're talking about, Mrs. Lawson." My father's face turned red. "And who the hell are you to stick your nose into my family's business?" I stepped in before Ethan could answer, my voice calm but firm. "He's my legal counsel. And he's not interfering, he's helping me get out." Walter took a slow step forward, leaning on his cane. The sharp tap of it hitting the concrete echoed like a gavel striking wood. "If the two of you still have a shred of decency left," he said, his voice steady and deep, "then stop. This young woman owes nothing to the people who once called her a stranger." My father's composure snapped. He shouted, his voice cracking with fury. "She's destroying this family. She's making us a public disgrace. After everything we've done for her, raising her, feeding her, now she sues her own parents? Is that your idea of morality?" I looked him straight in the eyes, my tone even but cutting. "Family? You mean the one that held reunions without inviting me? The one that used my name to open credit cards and forged Grandpa's signature to steal from the trust? If that's what you call family, then I suppose I should be grateful because it gave me a second chance at being born. Therefore." My mother lifted her hand to her mouth, her voice trembling. "Rachel, don't say that. I was just afraid of losing you. Everything I did was because I care about you." I gave a faint, bitter smile. You lost me the moment you said I wasn't real family at that dinner. The air froze. A few neighbors peeked out from their porches, whispering to each other. Someone called out softly from across the fence. Everything okay over there? Moments later, the sound of police sirens echoed down the street. Someone in the neighborhood must have reported a domestic disturbance. Two local officers stepped out of their cruiser, walking calmly but alert. Is there a problem here? One of them asked. Ethan stepped forward. No physical altercation, officers, just a legal discussion between parties. But maintaining distance would be best for everyone's safety. The older officer nodded and turned to my father. Sir, I suggest you calm down and leave the premises if you have no lawful reason to be here. My father's fists clenched. His face flushed deep red, and he muttered under his breath, ungrateful. Then he turned toward me, eyes burning with a mix of anger and helplessness. You'll regret this, Rachel. Blood is still blood. You can change your name, your address, but you can't change what runs in your veins. I met his stare, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the air. Maybe I can't change my blood, but I can choose how I live, and I choose not to let that blood keep hurting me. Walter stepped forward slowly, his gaze fixed on his son. Robert, I've given you chance after chance. I thought you were weak, but I never imagined you'd sink so low as to forge your own father's signature to steal money. And now you dare stand here and talk about blood? His tone wasn't loud, but every word landed like a blade. My father faltered just slightly, his shoulders tensing, his hand trembling before he dropped it to his side. My mother broke into sobs, tears streaming down her face. Walter, please don't do this. We were wrong. But I was only afraid of losing my daughter. I didn't know anything about the money, I swear. It was Robert. He told me to sign because he said it would help Vanessa's career. Ethan glanced at me and motioned for silence. I only nodded, saying nothing. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them and spoke in a low, steady voice. All right. I won't have the police arrest you today. But from this moment on, the trust has been placed under new supervision. The two of you won't see another cent of it. I have only one lawful heir now, Rachel. Everyone went still. Even the younger officer hesitated for a second. My mother stared at me in disbelief, while my father's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. Walter turned to me, his voice softening. Now you can focus on your own part. I nodded, hot tears running down my cheeks faster than I could wipe them away. A few moments later, the police asked everyone to disperse. My parents walked back to their SUV without a word, shrinking in the distance until they disappeared around the corner. Ethan gathered up the documents, while Walter stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. A chapter closed, Rachel. Not pleasant but necessary. I nodded, my voice catching. Do you think they hate me now? He gave a sad, quiet smile. They do. But that isn't your concern, you chose the truth. And the truth, even when hated, is still the only light worth living by. I looked up at Portland's gray sky, where the clouds were beginning to break apart. From now on, I knew I would carry something new, not the weight of guilt, but the weight of freedom. Heavy, yes, but heavy in a way that makes you stand tall. When Walter and Ethan left, I stayed in the doorway, staring at the empty street ahead. The house was silent, but I no longer felt empty inside. I had just watched an entire dynasty of deception collapse, not with an explosion, but with the truth spoken in daylight. And in that final silence, I realized I had taken back the most precious thing they'd ever stolen from me, the right to belong to myself. 3 months after that final confrontation, everything officially ended in silence, no media lights, no headlines, no cameras waiting outside the courthouse. Ethan told me, sometimes justice doesn't arrive with the bang of a gavel. Sometimes it's just paperwork that forces people to finally read every single word. He was right. When the civil judgment arrived, I read it slowly, as if turning the last page of a long, painful chapter. The court ruled that no criminal charges would be filed, since the forgery had been settled privately within the family. but it ordered my parents to repay the full amount illegally withdrawn from the family trust plus interest, as required by law. The management rights were permanently transferred to Walter, with me listed as secondary trustee. And one final line, small but sharp, read, "All parties are prohibited from accessing, impersonating, or using the complainant's identity in any financial capacity moving forward." Holding that document, I didn't feel triumph, only release. The need to prove I was right, to be heard, to be acknowledged, it was all gone. Everything had been restored to where it belonged, and that was enough. The family, in the truest sense of the word, no longer existed. But sometimes, collapse is the only way out of a cage painted to look like stability. Vanessa left Portland 2 weeks later. She texted me, "I'm in Denver now. No job yet, but this morning I went for a walk and no one asked what I was doing. For the first time, I feel like I can breathe." I read her message, and something inside me softened. Maybe the freedom I'd fought for wasn't just mine. I still kept in touch with Walter. Every Friday afternoon, we met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, the one with dim hanging lights and the smell of warm waffles drifting to the door. He always brought a stack of documents. I brought my laptop. Together, we were building something new, the Greenlight Foundation, a trust to help young people who had been financially exploited or controlled by their own families. Walter once said, "I used to think silence was a form of respect. But no silence only convinces the guilty they have permission to continue." I remember the first day I filled out the nonprofit registration form. In the mission statement section, I wrote, "To create a safe space for those who have paid a price just to be loved." When that line came off the printer and into my hands, I felt as if every loss I'd endured had finally found its meaning. My father has been silent ever since the judgment. No calls, no emails. In his world, I may as well have died. My mother, though she still tried to hold on to something, perhaps the remnants of motherhood. One September morning, I received an email from her. No subject line, just a few lines. "I'm sorry. Not because I'm being forced to apologize, but because I truly regret it. I thought I was protecting the family, but in the process I was slowly killing my daughter. If you don't want to forgive me, I understand. But if one day you remember home, I'll still be there." I sat still for a long time after reading it. No tears, no anger, just a stillness inside me like the surface of a lake. I printed the email, slipped it into the red binder where I had documented this entire journey, and beneath it I wrote a single line. "I forgive, but I don't forget." That night I opened my window, and Portland's damp breeze carried the scent of rain into my room. I stared out toward the Hawthorne Bridge, where the lights reflected on the water like streaks of memory fading away. I realized then that forgiveness isn't opening the door for someone else to return, it's opening the road for yourself to move on. The next morning, when Ethan called and asked, "Now that it's all over, what will you do?" I answered lightly, "Live." But this time, for real. A year later, I moved to Seattle. My new apartment sits on the 20th floor, overlooking a bright avenue where people and cars flow like the lifeblood of a city that's truly alive. In the mornings, I stand on the balcony with a cup of coffee, breathing in the damp air mixed with the scent of roasted beans. No one asks me, "When are you coming home?" No more emails accusing me of being cold. There's only me alone and free. I'm preparing for the opening of the Foundation's first support center, Breaking the Silence. It's the project Walter and I have spent 8 months building together. The center is in a renovated old building, with private counseling rooms, a vocational training area, and a small library. I designed every detail. Soft gray, white walls, powder blue upholstered chairs, warm amber lights, everything aimed at creating safety. On the main wall hangs a wooden plaque carved with the words, "You deserve peace, even if you have to build it yourself." On opening day, it's raining again. But the room is fuller than I expected: students, social workers, even a few small press reporters. Walter sits in the front row, smiling with quiet pride. I step up onto the small stage, microphone in hand, looking out at the faces waiting. My voice trembles at first, then steadies. Family is not where we are born, it's where we are seen and not treated as a burden. For a few seconds the room is silent, then applause breaks out. Walter nods, his eyes glinting with emotion. I know this moment isn't just the launch of the center, it's the beginning of a new life for me. That night, back in my apartment, my phone buzzes. A message from Vanessa. I just told the truth on my podcast. I talked about you, about how you dared to say enough. I don't know how people will react, but I want them to understand. Silence can kill a person. I smile, looking out through the window at the heavy drops falling under the streetlights. I text back. I don't need anyone to know my story, I just need it to end. I set the phone down and open my old journal, the red binder that's been with me since the beginning. The paper is yellowed, the ink smudged in places, but the last page is still blank. I pick up my pen and write slowly. I once made their lives comfortable. Now I make my own life peaceful. I put the pen down and gaze out over the balcony where the rain still falls. But this time, I don't feel alone. I feel part of the city of life, of the lights reflected on the wet pavement. Tomorrow someone might still call me ungrateful, cold, too hard. But I know I don't have to prove anything anymore. I have crossed the stage where people saw me as a traitor and stepped into the territory of those who save themselves. In that place, quiet is no longer frightening, it's the reward. The rain keeps falling, and I let it, as if each drop is washing the old dust from my soul. From the 20th floor, Seattle shimmers in the night. I smile softly and whisper, not for anyone else to hear, only for myself.